The Ashen Sparrow drifted through the nebula like a forgotten memory. Her hull plates, patched so many times, they resembled an old quilt more than a starship's exterior. Captain Leora Lee Vance stood at the viewport, hands clasped behind her back, watching the swirling gases of the Varani sector paint cosmic auroras across the darkness. The year 2497 had not been kind to humanity's standing in the Galactic Council. But then again, no year had been particularly generous since first contact. "Captain, incoming transmission from Council headquarters," called Ensign Marcus Webb from his communication station. His voice carried the exhaustion they all felt, yet maintained that unbreakable thread of discipline that had become the Sparrow's unofficial motto: function despite failure. Lee turned, her weathered face illuminated by the soft glow of the command console. At 43, she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had faced extinction and emerged with scars worth keeping. "Put it through, Webb." The holographic display flickered, another system operating at half capacity, before resolving into the multi-limbed form of Council Representative Zaltorian. The arthropoid diplomat's mandibles clicked in what the crew had learned to recognize as distaste. "Captain Vance," the alien began, compound eyes reflecting no emotion that human physiology could interpret. "The Council has reached a decision regarding your assignment." Lee exchanged a glance with her first officer, Commander Thorn Ray. The ex-mercenary's scarred face remained impassive, but she caught the subtle tensing of his jaw. They had both expected this call, though neither would admit they'd been dreading it. "We're ready to serve, Representative," Lee replied, her tone carefully neutral. "Your vessel will be assigned to patrol the Hafon jump gate in the outer reaches of the Varanus sector," the alien continued. "You will depart immediately." Thorn couldn't contain his reaction this time. "The Hafon gate? That's a dead zone. Nothing's passed through that gate in decades." The Zaltorian's mandibles clicked again. "The Council's decision is final, Commander. The Ashen Sparrow is adequate for such a task." The transmission ended before Lee could respond, the hologram dissolving into static before winking out entirely. The bridge fell silent, save for the perpetual wheezing of the life support system's overworked filters. "They gave us the weakest ship in the fleet," Jack Ma said, breaking the silence from her engineering station. The 19-year-old prodigy hadn't looked up from her diagnostics panel, her fingers dancing across the controls with practiced precision. "And now they're sending us to guard an empty gate in the middle of nowhere." "It's a statement," Thorn said, his voice low and bitter, "about what they think of humans." Lee turned back to the viewport, her reflection superimposed over the nebula beyond. "Maybe," she conceded, "or maybe they're just giving us a chance to fail quietly, where no one will notice." "And if we don't fail?" Jack asked, finally looking up. A thin smile crossed Lee's face. "Then we'll be the most irritating success story in Council history." She straightened her uniform, patched in 3 places, but still bearing the Earth insignia on its shoulder. "Webb, plot a course for the Hafon gate. Jack, I want a full diagnostic on our systems before we hit FTL. Thorn, join me in my ready room." As the bridge crew dispersed to their tasks, Lee felt the familiar weight of command settle across her shoulders. The Ashen Sparrow might be the weakest ship in the fleet, but it was her ship, with her crew. And if the Council thought sending them to an abandoned jump gate would write them out of the narrative of galactic politics, they were about to be sorely disappointed. What Lee couldn't know then was just how disappointed the Council would be. The ready room, like everything else aboard the Sparrow, carried the patina of age and overuse. The small conference table was scratched from countless tactical meetings, and the chairs creaked with every shift of weight. Thorn sat across from Lee, his muscular frame making the furniture seem even more fragile. "You know what this is, right?" he asked without preamble. "It's a retirement post. They're putting us out to pasture." Lee activated the star chart embedded in the table's surface. The holographic display showed the Varanus sector, with the Haphon jump gate blinking at its farthest edge. "I'm not so sure," she said, zooming in on the gate. "The Haphon gate connects to the Zarek territories. The treaty's been holding for what, 15 years now?" 17, Thorne corrected. Before joining the Council fleet, he'd fought in the border skirmishes as a mercenary. The scars across his face weren't just from battles. One particularly jagged line from temple to jaw was from a Zarek prisoner of war he'd helped escape. The Zarek had marked him as an ally, not knowing that humans couldn't regrow tissue like their species could. But treaties with the Zarek are written in water. They honor them only as long as there's advantage. Lee nodded. "Which is why I find it strange they'd post the weakest ship in the fleet to guard a potential flashpoint." Thorne leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You think the Council knows something? That they're expecting trouble?" "I think," Lee said carefully, "that the Council is hedging their bets. If nothing happens, we spend 6 months staring at an inactive gate. If something does happen, we're the expendable warning system," Thorne finished, his voice flat. "We die gloriously, and the Council gets their casus belli without risking a ship they actually value." Lee didn't contradict him. They'd served together long enough to speak these harsh truths openly. "We need to be prepared for both possibilities. I want our sensors at maximum sensitivity. If a Zarek ship so much as sneezes near that gate, I want to know about it." Thorne nodded, already mentally cataloging the ship's meager defensive capabilities. "We should run battle drills. The crew's gotten soft on patrol duty." "Agreed. And Thorne?" Lee met his gaze directly. "Let's keep our suspicions between us for now. The crew has enough to worry about." After Thorne left, Lee remained at the table, studying the star chart. The Haphon gate pulsed like a distant heartbeat, a reminder of how quickly peace could flatline. 17 years was a long time in human terms, but to species like the Zarak, with lifespans measuring centuries, it was barely a moment's pause. Her eyes drifted to the ship's manifest displayed on a secondary screen. The Ashen Sparrow had been built as a survey vessel 80 years ago, then retrofitted for military service during the last border conflict. Its weapon systems were outdated, its shields were minimal, and its engines were notorious for power fluctuations during FTL jumps. The crew was equally mismatched. Career officers serving alongside civilian contractors, and even a few political appointees that other captains had been eager to offload. Yet, there was something about this odd collection of misfits that gave Lee a stubborn hope. Humans had been the underdogs of the galactic community from the moment they'd emerged from their solar system. Too emotional, too unpredictable, too short-lived to be trusted with significant responsibility. But those same traits made them adaptable in ways the Council species often weren't. The Ashen Sparrow might be the weakest ship in the fleet, but its crew were human. And humans had a long history of turning weaknesses into strengths when backed into corners. Lee just hoped they wouldn't need to prove that particular point anytime soon. The journey to the Haphon Gate took 3 days at the Sparrow's limping FTL speeds. During that time, Lee implemented Thorne's suggestion of battle drills with ruthless efficiency. The crew, initially grumbling about the sudden increase in workload, gradually caught their captain's sense of urgency. On the final approach, Lee called the senior officers to the bridge. The main view screen showed the gate, a massive ring-shaped structure suspended in the void, its surface etched with geometric patterns that pulsed with a faint blue light. "Scans show minimal activity," reported Lieutenant Elliot Chen from the science station. "The gate hasn't been activated in at least 5 years, judging by the energy residue." Lee nodded. "Any sign of patrols, Zarek or otherwise?" "Nothing current," Chen replied. "There are ion trails from Council ships, but they're at least 3 months old." "So we really are alone out here," Jack said from her engineering console. The teenager had tied her black hair back in a practical bun, though rebellious strands still escaped to frame her face. Perfect spot for an ambush, if you ask me. Thorne shot her a warning glance, but Lee merely nodded. Keep that healthy paranoia. Lieutenant Ma. Webb. Establish our patrol pattern. Standard elliptical orbit around the gate. I want passive sensors running continuously. As the crew dispersed to their stations, an unexpected voice spoke up from the back of the bridge. Captain, might I have a word? Lee turned to find Dr. Shael Pal hovering near the turbolift. The Tonelli anthropologist was one of the political appointees assigned to the Sparrow, officially to study human crew dynamics, unofficially to keep an eye on the unpredictable primates. With iridescent scales covering their humanoid form and 4 independently focusing eyes, Dr. Pal was a constant reminder of the crew's alien oversight. Of course, Doctor, Lee gestured to her ready room. Once inside, the Tonelli scientist settled into a chair, their scales shifting color slightly to match the room's temperature. A biological response Lee had learned was involuntary. I couldn't help but notice the increased battle readiness drills, Dr. Pal began, their melodic voice carrying the characteristic harmonic overtones of their species. Is there cause for concern that I should be aware of? Lee measured her response carefully. Dr. Pal reported directly to the Council, but over the past 8 months aboard the Sparrow, they had shown more curiosity than condemnation toward human behavior. Standard procedure when approaching a new assignment, Lee said, especially one as isolated as this. I see. All 4 of Dr. Pal's eyes focused on Lee simultaneously, a sign of intense interest among Tonelli. And does standard procedure usually involve calibrating targeting systems that haven't been used in years? Lee allowed herself a small smile. You've been paying attention. It is my job, Captain. The anthropologist's scales rippled with a pattern that Lee had come to recognize as amusement. Though, I admit, human preparation rituals are particularly fascinating. Your species prepares most thoroughly for events you claim not to expect. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst, Lee quoted, an old human saying. Yes, I've cataloged approximately 342 variations of this sentiment in human literature, Dr. Pal replied. Curiously, most council species consider such preparation wasteful if the probability of danger is below certain thresholds. And what do the Tonelli think? Dr. Pal's scales shifted to a thoughtful blue. We think that any species that survived its own violent evolution to reach the stars must have developed survival instincts worth studying. They rose from the chair with fluid grace. I shall amend my reports to indicate that these drills fall within expected human behavioral parameters. Lee nodded, recognizing the small favor for what it was. Thank you, Doctor. Captain, Dr. Pal paused at the door. Another human saying I've studied suggests that paranoia is only problematic if one is actually wrong about being targeted. With that cryptic statement, they glided from the room. Lee stared at the closed door for a long moment before returning to the bridge. The anthropologist's words echoed in her mind as she took her position in the command chair. Around her, the crew worked with the focused efficiency that came from repeated drills and shared purpose. Status report, she called. Standard orbit established. Webb reported from navigation. Passive sensors online and recording. Engineering systems nominal, Jack added. Well, nominal for this bucket of bolts. Anyway, Lee allowed herself a brief smile at the young engineer's perpetual dissatisfaction with the Sparrow systems. Very good. Now we wait. They didn't have to wait long. The alarm came at ship's midnight, 72 hours into their patrol. Lee had been dozing in her quarters when the tactical alert jolted her awake. She was on the bridge within 3 minutes, still securing her uniform as she emerged from the turbolift. Report, she demanded, taking in the controlled chaos of the night shift responding to the alert. Thorne was already there, his expression grim as he gestured to the main view screen. Sensor ghost, extreme range, appeared for 12 seconds before disappearing again. Lee studied the replay of the sensor reading. The contact was faint, barely distinguishable from background radiation, but it was there. Analysis? Could be a sensor malfunction, offered the night shift science officer. But the pattern matches known Zarek stealth tech. Lee's eyes narrowed. Just one contact? So far, Thorne confirmed. If it is Zarek, it could be a scout. Lee nodded slowly, her mind racing through potential scenarios. Wake the senior staff. I want a full sensor sweep, active and passive. If there's something out there, I want to know what we're dealing with. Within 20 minutes, the bridge was fully staffed. Jack had joined them from engineering. Her uniform rumpled from sleep, but her eyes sharp with focus as she fine-tuned the sensor array. If it is a Zarek scout, they've upgraded their cloaking tech, she reported. I'm barely getting anything, even on the active sweeps. Keep trying, Lee ordered. Webb, any communications we can intercept? The communications officer shook his head. Nothing on standard frequencies. I'm expanding the search parameters. The tension on the bridge was palpable, as minutes stretched into an hour with no further sign of the contact. Lee was about to order a stand-down to yellow alert when Jack suddenly straightened at her console. Captain, I'm picking up something odd. Define odd, Lieutenant. Lee moved to stand behind the young engineer. Jack pointed to a pattern on her screen. These energy spikes. They're too regular to be natural. But they're not matching any known propulsion or weapon signature in our database. Lee studied the readings. Could it be a new type of drive system? Maybe, Jack frowned. Or maybe. Her fingers flew across the controls, adjusting parameters. Oh, hell. Lieutenant, Lee prompted. Jack looked up, her face pale. It's not one ship, Captain. It's many, moving in perfect synchronization. I think we're looking at a fleet. A chill settled over the bridge. Lee straightened, her decision already made. Red alert. All hands to battle stations. Webb, prepare an emergency transmission to Council headquarters. Code Blackgate. As the crew scrambled to comply, Thorne moved to Lee's side. Code Blackgate? That's a full-scale invasion protocol. And if Jack's right, that's exactly what we're facing, Lee replied, her voice low. The Council sent us here to be canaries in a coal mine. Thorne, let's make sure our warning song is loud enough for them to hear. The red alert klaxons wailed as the Ashen Sparrow prepared for a confrontation she was never designed to survive. The emergency transmission was away, its encrypted contents racing toward Council space at FTL speeds. Whether it would arrive in time, or whether the Council would respond swiftly enough if it did, remained an open question. For now, the Sparrow and her crew were on their own. Multiple contacts emerging from stealth, announced the tactical officer. Confirmed Zarek signatures. The main view screen showed the void beyond the jump gate coming alive with ships, sleek, predatory vessels with the distinctive barbed silhouettes of Zarek warcraft. The scale became apparent as more and more ships decloaked, their numbers quickly overwhelming the tactical display's capacity to track them individually. That's an invasion force, Thorne said quietly. Lee nodded, her face grim. And we're the only thing standing between them and Council space. She turned to Webb. Any response to our transmission? Nothing yet, Captain. The nearest Council patrol is at least 12 hours away at maximum FTL. Lee absorbed this information with outward calm, though her mind was racing through options, none of them particularly promising. The Sparrow was outgunned, outmanned, and operating with systems that belonged in a museum rather than a potential war zone. Jack, she called. What's the status of the jump gate itself? The young engineer checked her readings. Still inactive, but I'm detecting power buildup in the gate systems. I think they're preparing to bring it online. Can we disable it? Jack considered this, her brow furrowed in concentration. Maybe. The Sparrow's weapons aren't powerful enough to damage the gate's structure, but if we could access the control systems... A hack? Thorne asked skeptically. Against Xeric encryption? It's better than a suicide charge, Jack retorted. Lee held up a hand to forestall the argument. Both of you, my ready room. Now. She turned to the tactical officer. Maintain position, but keep us at the maximum sensor range. If those ships make any move toward us, I want to know immediately. In the ready room, Lee activated the security field that would prevent any sound from escaping, a precaution that seemed almost quaint given their circumstances. But habits of command died hard. Jack, talk to me about this hack. Can you actually do it? The young engineer hesitated, then nodded with growing confidence. The jump gates were built by the ancient predecessors, not the Xeric. All the modern species are using retrofit interfaces to control them. If I can identify which control protocols the Xeric are using to activate the gate, you can hijack the process, Lee finished. But that would require getting close enough to the gate to establish a direct link, and running a bypass through our own systems, Jack confirmed. It's risky. If I make a mistake, the feedback could fry half our circuits. Thorne crossed his arms. And while we're attempting this hack, we'd be sitting ducks for any Xeric ship that decided to take a potshot at us. True, Lee acknowledged, but it might be our only play. She turned back to Jack. How close would we need to get? Within 1,000 kilometers. The gate's control frequencies are highly directional to prevent exactly this kind of interference. Lee nodded slowly, a plan forming in her mind. The Sparrow was originally a survey vessel. Do we still have any of the original sensor drones in storage? Jack's eyes widened as she caught on to Lee's thinking. We have 8 left from the original complement. They're outdated, but their communication systems should still work. Could you modify them to serve as signal relays? Position them around the gate to create a distributed network? A slow smile spread across Jack's face. That might actually work. I'd need to reprogram them. But with a distributed network, we could stay at a safer distance while still accessing the gate systems. Thorne looked between them, his tactical mind already assessing the implications. The Xeric will detect the drones as soon as they're deployed. Not if we time it right, Lee said. If we wait until they're in the final stages of activating the gate, their sensors will be focused on the power fluctuations. It's still a massive risk, Thorne insisted. And even if we disable the gate temporarily, we're just delaying the inevitable. That fleet will overrun us. Lee met his gaze steadily. I'm open to alternatives, Commander. Thorne held her gaze for a long moment before his shoulders slumped slightly. We need a diversion, something to keep their attention divided while the drones are deployed. The Sparrow still has the original survey vessel's specialized sensor package, Jack suggested. We could use it to generate false readings, make them think there are council ships approaching. Would that work against Xeric sensors? Lee asked. Jack shrugged. For a little while. Long enough to create confusion. Maybe. Lee considered their options, such as they were. A desperate plan with minimal chances of success, versus certain destruction. When framed that way, the choice became obvious. Make it happen, she ordered. Jack, get those drones modified. Thorne, prepare a tactical approach that gives us the best chance of deploying them undetected. She paused, meeting each of their eyes in turn. I won't order anyone to stay aboard for this mission. Once the plan is in motion, we'll launch escape pods for any crew who wish to evacuate. With respect, Captain, Thorne said stiffly. That's not how human crews operate. He's right, Jack added. We're not abandoning the Sparrow. Or you. Lee felt a surge of pride that she carefully kept from showing on her face. Then, let's get to work. We have a fleet to stop and not much time to figure out how. As they filed out of the ready room, Lee caught sight of Dr. Powell hovering near the science station, their scales a curious mixture of colors that Lee couldn't interpret. The anthropologist inclined their head slightly, in what might have been respect, or simply scientific interest in watching humans face impossible odds. Either way, Lee reflected, they were about to get quite a show. The next 6 hours were a frenzy of activity aboard the Ashen Sparrow. In engineering, Jack led a team in modifying the sensor drones, their fingers flying over circuits and control panels with desperate speed. Thorne coordinated with the tactical and navigation teams, plotting an approach vector that would use the minimal cover available in the sector, primarily dispersed gas clouds and debris from an ancient asteroid collision. Lee moved between stations, offering encouragement where needed and making critical decisions when conflicts arose. The plan was coming together, but it remained dangerously fragile, dependent on timing, luck, and the Zarek's attention being divided at exactly the right moment. To everyone's surprise, Dr. Pal offered assistance, their knowledge of Zarak behavioral patterns providing valuable insights into how their fleet commanders might respond to various diversionary tactics. They are hierarchical to a fault, the anthropologist explained as they reviewed the tactical projections. All decisions flow from the command vessel, with minimal independent initiative permitted to subsidiary captains. That's consistent with what we observed during the border conflicts, Thorne agreed. Cut off the head, and the body flounders. Dr. Pal's scales rippled in what Lee had learned was their equivalent of a nod. They also place great emphasis on symbolic victories. If they identify the Sparrow as a council vessel, they may divert disproportionate resources to destroying it as a demonstration of their superiority. You're suggesting we paint a target on our backs, Lee said, understanding dawning. I am merely observing Zarek's psychological tendencies, Dr. Pal replied smoothly. How you apply such observations is, of course, your decision, Captain. Lee exchanged a glance with Thorne. If we could get them to focus on us, the drones would have a better chance, he finished, nodding slowly. It's risky, but it could work. Everything about this plan is risky, Lee pointed out. We might as well embrace it. As the preparations continued, Webb called Lee to the communication station. Captain, I've been analyzing the Zarek communications we've been able to intercept. There's something unusual about their fleet configuration. Unusual how? Webb pointed to a schematic he'd compiled, based on the intercepted data. Their command and control systems are even more centralized than usual. The entire fleet appears to be networked through a single relay hub, aboard what we think is their flagship. Lee studied the diagram, a new possibility forming in her mind. If we could access that hub, we might be able to do more than just disable the gate, Webb confirmed, his eyes bright with the same desperate hope that had begun to infect the entire crew. We could potentially disrupt their entire command network. Lee placed a hand on the young officer's shoulder. Good work, Webb. Share this with Jack and see if she can incorporate it into the drone programming. As Webb hurried off, Lee felt a presence at her side. Ensign Marcus Webb, no relation to the communications officer, stood there, his civilian engineering uniform a reminder of the Sparrow's mixed crew. Beside him stood a small girl, no more than 7 years old, with her father's dark complexion and solemn eyes. Captain, Marcus began hesitantly, I wanted to ask about Marie. He placed a protective hand on his daughter's shoulder. When the action starts, Lee knelt to the child's level, meeting those serious eyes directly. Hello, Marie. Hello, Captain, the girl replied with grave formality. Your father is very important to our mission, Lee told her. He's helping make our ship strong enough to face the bad ships out there. Marie nodded. Daddy fixes things. He fixed my star projector when it broke. That's right, Lee smiled. And right now, we need him to help fix some very important things on the ship. She looked up at Marcus. I've had a secure area prepared in Cargo Bay 3. It's been reinforced and has independent life support. Dr. Prisha will be there with medical supplies, and several off-duty crew will be standing by. Relief washed over Marcus's face. Thank you, Captain. Thank you, Ensign, for your service in these circumstances. Lee rose to her feet. We couldn't do this without you. As Marcus led his daughter away, Lee felt the weight of responsibility settle even more heavily on her shoulders. It wasn't just about defying the Council's low expectations anymore, or even about stopping an invasion. It was about the people who had placed their trust in her. People like Marcus and Marie, who deserved a future beyond this desperate moment. The intercom chimed, pulling her from her thoughts. Captain, to the bridge, came Thorne's voice. The Zarek fleet is moving. On the bridge, the tactical display showed the Zarek warships forming into an organized pattern around the jump gate. Their movements were precise, almost ritualistic, each vessel taking up a position that corresponded to the geometric patterns etched into the gate's surface. They're preparing for activation, Jack reported, her voice tense. The gate's power signatures are increasing exponentially. How long? Lee asked. Based on current buildup rates, 27 minutes until the gate reaches full power. Lee nodded. Then that's our window. Status of the drones? Ready for deployment, Jack confirmed. I've programmed them with a distributed attack protocol. Once they're in position, they'll create a feedback loop in the gate's control systems. And the Zarek command network? Jack's expression was a mixture of pride and apprehension. If we can get close enough to their relay hub, I've designed a brute force algorithm that might, and I stress might, be able to overload their entire command network. Might is better odds than we had an hour ago, Lee said firmly. Helm, prepare to execute approach pattern Theta. Communications, stand by with the sensor ghost projections. The crew acknowledged their orders with crisp efficiency, the usual banter absent in the face of their desperate gambit. Lee settled into the command chair, feeling the subtle vibrations of the Sparrow's aging engines as they prepared for rapid acceleration. All hands, this is the captain, she announced, her voice carrying to every section of the ship. In a few moments, we will be engaging with a Zarek invasion fleet. Our mission is to prevent them from activating the Hafon jump gate and launching an attack on Council space. She paused, aware that these might be the last orders she ever gave. I won't mislead you about our chances. They're slim. But I've seen what this crew can do when backed into a corner, and I believe in every one of you. Today, we prove that the weakest ship in the fleet has the strongest heart. Vance out. A moment of silence followed her words. Then, a spontaneous cheer erupted from various stations around the bridge. Even Thorne, typically stoic, gave a sharp nod of approval. Helm, engage, Lee ordered. The Ashen Sparrow surged forward, her overtaxed engines whining in protest as she accelerated toward the Zarek formation. The element of surprise was with them. At least initially, the Zarek, focused on the gate activation, were slow to react to the solitary vessel approaching their perimeter. Drones away, Jack reported, as the Sparrow reached the first deployment point. The tiny craft, little more than sensor packages with minimal propulsion, scattered in predetermined patterns, their signatures masked by a debris field they were passing through. First wave detected, Thorne warned as several Zarek vessels broke formation, turning toward the Sparrow. Incoming weapons lock. Evasive pattern Delta, Lee commanded. Webb, activate ghost projections. The Sparrow's specialized sensor package came online, broadcasting false readings that suggested a squadron of Council ships was approaching from the opposite vector. On the tactical display, they watched as several of the pursuing Zarek vessels hesitated, then diverted to investigate the phantom threat. It's working, Thorne said, unable to keep the surprise from his voice. For now, Lee cautioned. How many drones in position? 3 out of 8, Jack reported. We need at least 6 for the network to function. A violent shudder ran through the ship as a Zarek disruptor beam grazed their shields. Warning lights flashed across multiple consoles. Shields at 60%, called the tactical officer. 2 Zarek destroyers on intercept course. Continue evasive maneuvers, Lee ordered. Prepare countermeasures. The Sparrow twisted and juked through space, her outdated engines straining beyond their design limits as they pushed the ship through maneuvers that should have torn her apart. In engineering, damage control teams raced from one crisis to another, patching systems and rerouting power as failures cascaded through the aging vessel. 5 drones in position, Jack announced, her voice tight with tension. 1 more. Another hit rocked the ship, more devastating than the first. A console exploded in a shower of sparks, sending a crewman tumbling to the deck. The lights flickered, then stabilized as backup systems engaged. Shields at 30%, Thorne reported grimly. We can't take another direct hit like that. Lee gripped the arms of her command chair, her knuckles white. Helm, bring us around to heading 147 Mark III. Full power to engines. The new course took them directly toward the heart of the Zarek formation, a suicidal run by any standard tactical assessment. But as the Sparrow accelerated, the final drone slipped into position, unnoticed amidst the chaos. 6 drones deployed and networked, Jack confirmed, a note of triumph in her voice. Initiating gate interface in 3, 2, 1. On the main view screen, the jump gate's steady power buildup suddenly faltered. The geometric patterns etched into its surface flickered, their rhythmic pulsing becoming erratic. It's working, Jack exclaimed. The gate's control systems are destabilizing. A collective cheer went up from the bridge crew, but Lee's expression remained focused. What about the Zarek command network? Jack's triumph faded slightly. We're still too far from their relay hub. We need to get closer to their flagship. Lee exchanged a glance with Thorne. They both understood what that meant, diving even deeper into the heart of the enemy fleet, with shields already dangerously depleted and systems failing across the ship. Helm, adjust course, Lee ordered, her voice steady despite the implications of the command. Target the Zarek flagship. The Sparrow banked sharply, engines screaming in protest as the ship drove toward the largest vessel in the Zarek formation, a massive dreadnought bristling with weapons emplacements and surrounded by a protective screen of smaller craft. They're scrambling to respond, Thorne reported, studying the tactical display. The ghost projections are still causing confusion in their outer perimeter, but the ships near the flagship are orienting toward us. Time to relay hub interface range? Lee asked. 2 minutes at current speed, Jack replied, assuming we survive that long. As if in answer to her doubt, a barrage of disruptor fire lanced out from the Zarek escort vessels. The Sparrow jinked and rolled, avoiding the worst of it, but several beams found their mark. The ship bucked violently, artificial gravity fluctuating as power systems overloaded. "Shields critical!" shouted the tactical officer over the wail of damage alarms. "Multiple hull breaches on decks 4 and 5. Emergency force fields holding but power reserves dropping. Reroute all non-essential power to shields and engines," Lee ordered. "We need to get closer." The Sparrow pressed on, now trailing debris and venting atmosphere from multiple wounds in her hull. Around them, the Zarek fleet was regaining its coordination, the confusion caused by the ghost projections giving way to organized response as more ships oriented toward the lone intruder. 1 minute to interface range, Jack called out, her hands flying over her console as she prepared the brute force algorithm. But the flagship is raising additional shields. Lee's mind raced, searching for options. "The drones," she said suddenly. "Can we repurpose the ones interfering with the gate?" Jack looked up, eyes widening with understanding. "Redirect them to create a distributed EMP? It might work, but it would mean losing our hold on the gate." "Do it," Lee decided. "Better to let the gate reactivate than to let that fleet remain operational." Jack nodded. Already reprogramming the drones? On the view screen. The jump gate's disrupted patterns began to stabilize as the drones released their hold on its systems and reoriented toward the Zarek flagship. 30 seconds to interface range, Thorne announced. "Multiple weapons locks. Brace for impact." The next barrage hit them with devastating force. The Sparrow reeled, systems failing across all decks as disruptor beams tore through her weakened shields and into the hull itself. The bridge lights failed completely, emergency illumination casting everything in a harsh red glow. "Shields gone," reported the tactical officer, his voice steady despite the dire news. "Hull integrity at 42% and falling." "Maintain course," Lee ordered, rising from her chair as a support beam crashed to the deck beside her. "Jack, status of the drones?" The young engineer was illuminated by the glow of her console, one of the few still functioning. "Repositioning complete. EMP package ready. But we need to get closer for the command signal to penetrate their shields." "Helm, give her everything we've got," Lee commanded. "One final push." The Sparrow surged forward, systems failing and hull plates tearing away, but her momentum carrying her inexorably toward the massive Zarek flagship. Around them, enemy ships fired continuously, their weapons tearing chunks from the dying vessel, but unable to stop her suicidal charge. "Interface range achieved," Jack shouted over the cacophony of alarms and failing systems. "Transmitting command signal. Now!" For a breathless moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, in perfect synchronization, the repurposed drones detonated, releasing a carefully calibrated electromagnetic pulse that rippled through space toward the Zarek flagship. The pulse struck the flagship's shields, which flared brilliantly before collapsing inward. The EMP continued through, reaching the vessel itself, and more importantly, the relay hub at its heart. On the tactical display, they watched as the effects spread outward like a wave. Ship after ship in the Zarek fleet suddenly went dark, their lights flickering and weapon systems powering down as the command network that coordinated them suffered a catastrophic overload. "It worked," Jack whispered, disbelief and elation warring in her voice. "The entire fleet is experiencing cascade failures." Lee gripped the back of her chair, staying upright through sheer force of will as the deck shifted beneath her feet. "Damage report. Critical across all systems," Thorne replied grimly. "We're operating on emergency power only. Life support failing on decks 2 through 6. Hull breaches. Too many to count." Lee nodded, accepting the inevitable. "Begin evacuation procedures. All hands to escape pods." As the order went out, she turned to the view screen, taking in the sight of the disabled Zarek fleet. Dozens of vessels drifting powerless around the jump gate that had nearly become their invasion route into Council space. "We did it," she said softly. "The weakest ship in the fleet." "Lee," Thorne's voice broke through her moment of reflection, using her first name in a rare breach of protocol. "We need to go. This ship is breaking apart." She turned to find him standing beside her, his scarred face illuminated by the emergency lights. Behind him, Jack was securing the last of the critical data from her console. "The crew?" Lee asked. "Evacuation is proceeding," Thorne confirmed. "Including Marie and her father. Dr. Powell is helping coordinate from Deck 3. Lee nodded, taking one last look around the bridge that had been her home for the past 2 years. "Then let's not keep them waiting." The escape pods launched from the dying Sparrow like seeds from a bursting pod, scattering in all directions to minimize the chance of capture. From her position in the command pod, Lee watched through the small viewport as her ship broke apart, sections tearing away as structural integrity finally failed completely. Beside her, Thorne and Jack maintained communications with the other pods, accounting for survivors and coordinating their drift patterns to stay within range of each other. The news was better than Lee had dared hope. Nearly 90% of the crew had made it to escape pods before the ship's final collapse. "What now, Captain?" Jack asked, her young face showing the strain of the past hours, but her eyes still bright with the afterglow of their impossible victory. "Now we wait," Lee replied. "The emergency signal is broadcasting. If the Council received our initial warning, they'll be sending ships to investigate." "And if they didn't?" Thorne asked quietly. Lee met his gaze steadily. Then we've bought them time to prepare. The Zarek fleet is disabled, but not destroyed. Eventually, they'll restore systems and regroup. But without their coordinated command network, Jack pointed out, we proved that centralization is their weakness. A lesson the Council would do well to learn, came a melodic voice from the rear of the pod. Lee turned to find Dr. Pal watching them. The anthropologist scales a contemplative shade of blue. You joined us, she observed, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. I am an anthropologist, Dr. Pal replied simply. This was unprecedented behavior, worthy of detailed observation. A small smile tugged at Lee's lips. And what will you report to the Council about our unprecedented behavior? All four of Dr. Pal's eyes focused intently. That humans, when given the weakest ship in the fleet, conquered an armada with it. That your species' propensity for unorthodox thinking and emotional decision-making, traits the Council has long considered liabilities, proved to be your greatest strengths. The anthropologist's scales shifted to a color Lee had never seen them display before. I will report that I have reconsidered certain assumptions about humanity's place in the galactic community. Before Lee could respond, the communication system chimed. Captain, Webb's voice came through, tight with excitement. We're detecting multiple FTL signatures approaching. Council registry. Relief washed over Lee in a wave so powerful, she had to grip the edge of her seat to steady herself. Understood. Prepare to transmit our coordinates. As the rescue fleet arrived, a full battle group, Lee noted with satisfaction. The true scope of what they had accomplished began to sink in. The Ashen Sparrow was gone, but her crew had stopped an invasion force that would have devastated Council space. The weakest ship in the fleet had become the savior of the galactic community. Hours later, aboard the Council flagship, Lee stood at a viewport, much like the one she had gazed through aboard the Sparrow just days earlier. Behind her, representatives from various Council species conferred in hushed tones, occasionally glancing in her direction with expressions ranging from disbelief to newfound respect. Jack and Thorne joined her at the viewport, along with Webb, Marie and her father, and Dr. Pal. Together, they watched as salvage teams secured the disabled Zarek vessels. They're saying they want to recover what's left of the Sparrow, Jack said quietly. To place it in a museum. Lee nodded, unsurprised. Symbols are important. They're also talking about a new ship, Thorne added. Purpose-built, with a human crew and human design principles. Let me guess, Lee said with a thin smile. They want to call it the Phoenix. Actually, Dr. Pal interjected, the Council is proposing the name Human Defiance. The anthropologist's scales rippled with what Lee had come to recognize as genuine amusement. They believe it captures the essential quality that allowed your victory. Lee considered this, then nodded slowly. Human Defiance. I like it. As the others moved away to attend to various duties, Lee remained at the viewport, her thoughts with the ship that had carried them through impossible odds. The Ashen Sparrow had been old, outmatched, and overlooked, much like humanity itself in the eyes of the Galactic Council. Perhaps that was about to change. Captain Vance, a council aide approached, their multi-jointed limbs moving with precise formality. The High Council requests your presence for debriefing. Lee straightened her borrowed uniform, still bearing the Earth insignia. She noted with satisfaction. Tell them I'll be right there. As she turned to follow the aide, Lee caught sight of her reflection in the viewport, superimposed over the stars beyond, just as it had been when this journey began. The woman looking back at her carried the same quiet authority, the same determination, but there was something new in her eyes now, a certainty that had been forged in the crucible of impossible odds and unexpected victory. They had given humans the weakest ship in the fleet, and humans had conquered an armada with it, not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through the qualities that made them human: adaptability, creativity, and the stubborn refusal to accept defeat even when logic suggested no other outcome was possible. In her final log entry aboard the Sparrow, just before the evacuation, Lee had recorded a message that would now be heard by the entire council. Strength is not measured by the weapons we carry or the armor we wear. It is found in the connections we forge, the adaptations we make, and the courage to face impossible odds with nothing but our wits and our will. Today, the Ashen Sparrow proved that the weakest ship in the fleet can change the course of history. Remember this, not as a human victory, but as a reminder that true power lies not in domination, but in the ability to turn perceived weakness into unexpected strength. As Lee stepped into the council chamber, head high and shoulders squared, she knew that those words would become more than just a final log entry. They would become the foundation of humanity's new place among the stars. No longer the underestimated newcomers, but valued allies whose unique perspective might just save the galaxy from threats yet unseen. The weakest ship in the fleet had become the strongest symbol of a new era. And Lee Vance, once a captain sent to fade quietly into obscurity, would ensure that the legacy of the Ashen Sparrow and the lessons learned from her impossible victory would never be forgotten.